Conference in Berlin, Colonel Laurie Mobuka commented that the EW community seems to be in a state of disarray and that there's a need for a better understanding of EW effectiveness. Major Paul Radal stated that EW can deliver a strategic effect when you get it right. Major Richard Craig stated that there is a need to reduce the weight burden on dismounted soldiers, and EW is largely conducted from an engineering point of view today. Gavin O'Connell said, "Don't blame the equipment when it doesn't work." And asked the question, how do we make electronic attack work more smartly? During the panel discussion that followed, Lieutenant Jakob Humboldt asked the question, what is the hardest problem in teaching EW to operators? And after much discussion, the conclusion was using the equipment effectively. But I would offer that there are a couple of other alternative answers. The operators don't just need to know how to operate the equipment. They also need to understand and recognize the conditions under which EW can be effective. And it's not intuitive. There were several important points raised by the speakers, but arguably the most important is this. EW can provide a strategic effect when it's done correctly. I'd now like to present some arguments for the use of a scientific approach in EW and give a partial roadmap. Ever since EW was created, it's relied on empirical observations, nomographs, and rules of thumb. For example, the free-range radar equation shown here. In this equation, it's assumed that there's no buildings, no reflections, no ground effects. And if you knew this equation, you were considered to be an EW practitioner. Most of the time, this is good enough, but often it's not. But largely, the environmental considerations were not considered, with the possible exception of the marine EW community, whereas it acknowledged that surface reflections were an important element. So, previously, very little hard science was applied to the EW problem. Earlier work seldom was tested under hostile live fire conditions, with the notable exceptions of the EA-6B in Vietnam and suppression of air defenses in Iraq. But there's a difference between then and now. We now have low-intensity conflicts in urban settings, which means we need better capabilities against new threats. And today, lives are still being lost to radio-controlled weapons, despite the use of jamming. There are three specific requirements for EW practitioners to deliver protection that is needed and expected by users. And the key word for all of these is better. We need a better understanding of the threat, a better understanding of the physics, a better understanding of the phenomenology underpinning EW effectiveness. We also need better analytical and experimental tools and methodologies for EW effectiveness assessment, particularly for ECM. And I wanted to underscore the importance of methodologies, because we're coming back to this in a minute. We need real-time, in-situ, in-combat EW effectiveness assessment so we can react to negative indications. Now I'd like to turn the podium over. No, on the page ahead, sorry. Now I'd like to talk about the importance of methodology to the EW practitioner. In other words, how do we do things? There are 6 possible methodologies, at least that's what we're going to enumerate here. Observation, mediation, meditation, prayer, analysis, edicts, and let's just throw in rain dance for good measure. Of course, only 2 of these have anything to do with science. And let's talk about those for a moment. So let's start with observation. Observation is measurement driven, it's empirical, meaning that it's based on what we see, provides little or no insight into the problem or the solution. On the other hand, analysis is prediction-driven and provides a high level of insight into both the problem and the solution. We need both of these things. But the challenge is, how do we best scientifically manage the mix of these two things? To get a handle on this, let's remind ourselves that science connects prediction with observation. Observation, of course, being the same as measurement. For this reason, I'm returning to the issue of the importance of methodology. The challenge is to reconcile prediction and measurement. And that's what science does. This is called validation, and it's the proof that the analysis, which has given us so much insight into the problem and the solution, actually has some basis in reality. This is an essential step in applying science to the EW problem. And now I'll turn the podium over to Sean Shephard of Sky Industries.
Thank you, David. Well, I'll continue the presentation by talking about the scientific method, so we're all on the same page. Scientific method starts with a hypothesis, which is an idea that you have about how something works. From that, you make a prediction about something you've never seen before, and then design an experiment to demonstrate that prediction, to test that prediction. We make an observation, and then compare the observation with the prediction. And if the two agree with each other, this is some evidence, not necessarily conclusive evidence, but some evidence confirming the hypothesis. And if they don't agree, then we have to refine the experiment, assuming we have good control of our experiment in the first place, which is key. We have to refine the hypothesis and go through the loop again. Now, this is the scientific method by formal definition. And you can see that it is a process of continuous refinement. We never stop. We continuously refine. Another key important point for our community is that the purpose of measurements is for validating the hypothesis. If you're not doing this, you're not using the scientific method. In fact, you're doing something else, which is fine, because you'll definitely get an answer. But all of these things give an answer too. But only two of them are involved in science, and it's the combination of observation and analysis that's key to science. Now, there's a fly in the ointment, though. And the fly happens right here, when we get to a comparison between prediction and observation. And the main problem is something called nonlinear processes. Now, that may not mean very much to some of you, but if you want to talk about it, please come to the DRDC booth. We'd love to talk about this. But it is something which is everywhere. It's in everyday life. It's in the software we write. It's in every problem, every engagement. It's even in when you make toast in the morning. So it's a pervasive thing, nonlinear processes. And we can explain the problem in 3 steps. There is a breakdown in the predictability, and it's caused by nonlinear processes. And remember, the scientific method, prediction is key. So if there's a breakdown in predictability, we're going to have heartburn over the scientific method, because it's the alignment of those two things that really matters if we want to control the physical world, which we do. The second point is that this is a fundamental attribute of the problem. It is part of the DNA, it's that deep, of the problems that we are trying to solve. It's part of the DNA of everyday life. And separating nonlinear processes from the problems we're trying to solve is like trying to separate the sound of music from the violinist and the violin. You don't get one without the other. The third point is that this effect applies to hardware testing, software simulation, and real-world engagements, all 3. So basically what we can have is software simulation producing result A, and hardware in the loop testing producing result B, and both sides are potentially right, even though they may not agree with each other. The reason for that is, if both can be right and not get the same answer, is that they may not be representing, this happens if you're not representing exactly the same problem. You've got a software simulation that represents this, and a hardware experiment that represents that. They both produced the right answer, but we didn't align them correctly. So the challenge is to ensure that the software and the hardware tests are representing the same problem. Now, simulation and hardware-in-the-loop testings can be made to agree with each other. In fact, for example, in the Apollo program, the United States has achieved a remarkable record of success in matching simulation with reality. For example, in this program, velocity changes of the spacecraft were matched to predicted and measured values were matched to within centimeters per second. And that's a spacecraft which is traveling at thousands of kilometers per hour, 250,000 miles away. Centimeters per second. Another example is the nuclear weapons program. Predicted and measured yields commonly agreed within parts of a percent. It's astonishing agreement. It's a good thing, too. Another, the granddaddy of all examples, actually, is quantum physics, standard model of the atom. It's not very well known, but this is the most successful theory in the history of history. They get agreements between prediction and measurement which are tiny fractions of a percent. And other scientific communities use it in the scientific method as well. But in the EW communities we have frequented, this has been forgotten, the agreement. And expectations have been lowered. But concerning the nonlinearities and the complications they introduce, there is no escape from this. We might travel faster than light someday. We might eat chocolate without getting fat. We might even have world peace someday. All of these things are more likely than escaping the complexities that are introduced by nonlinear processes in the problems that we have to solve. The solution is that the answers that we get must be statistical. We have to use statistical methods to interpret the information that we gather scientifically. The situation is not hopeless. There are tools and methodologies and concepts available to us. Some of them involve fractals and chaos theory, fuzzy logic, game theory, these kinds of things. Are tools for us to use, but we have to pick them up and use them. It involves moving on to something else, another way of doing something, a new way of doing things. Anyway, back to the scientific method in EW. This is a technique which is consistently applied in other communities, and it's well understood and well practiced elsewhere. So why not in EW? Now, one reason is that often we're working in a crisis mode. In other words, the military, something happens suddenly, we're in a state of war. So we can't go to the user community and say, well, can you just put the war on hold for 6 months or so and we'll get you that answer? Instead, we've got to give them an answer right away. They field it, they use it, and after the conflict is over, there's very little appetite for science. The requirement is now over. So we've developed, historically, capabilities without using scientific rigor. Instead, we relied on field tests and empirical observations after the design was done. So, emergency situation, launch something, military says, launch something up for us right away, we've got to have it, we're going to the Falkland Islands in 7 days, sea carriers will be there, we need a jammer, you lash it together, you think it will work, send it out, do some tests in the field, rah-rah, there you go. But that's not the scientific method. We don't have the luxury of it at that point. We were really good engineers, but we didn't know what we didn't know about science. And some of this, I think, has been forgotten. But we can return to the question of why didn't we apply science in EW? You know, this is our professional community here, so we can ask some soul-searching, we should ask some soul-searching questions. Here's the thought, is it because we were a closed shop? Is it because we didn't really welcome outsiders? Specialized knowledge? Is it because of the arrogance of elite insiders? Is it because we're operating behind closed doors? Security, not just closed doors of security, but closed doors of technology too. Domain expertise. We know that, leave that to us. Were we playing to our egos? Or are we? Is this the psychology of why science didn't play in EW? We just didn't think we needed it. raise your hand if you think this is a solved problem. You know, there's another thought. We always thought we were the smartest people in the room. Now, this is as far as we can go, probably farther than we can go in 15 minutes. But we would like to leave you with 4 concluding points. We would advocate the application of the scientific method every time in the work that we do, and to raise our expectations of agreement between prediction and theory, prediction and measurement. The second point is we think it's important to acknowledge the fundamental breakdown of predictability that happens because of nonlinear processes. It's a property of properly debugged, properly functioning, properly used software. And it's a property of a correctly designed and properly handled scientific experiment. And we have to use statistical methods to draw the conclusions that our client community needs. The third point is that we need to promote the use of hard science in our professional community. And the fourth, and probably the most important point, we think it's important to promote and to continue discussion on this subject in our professional community. Feedback is welcome. It could be eggs or tomatoes, but it's welcome. At the DRDC booth will be there. And this concludes the presentation. Thank you for your attention.
David, Sean, thank you for standing in for Paul. Another excellent presentation. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Hi, Sean.
Good morning, Jason.
That's a great presentation. I'm curious, though, when you say observations, do you think one of the limiting factors that we have are the limited number of observations that we make during the instant that the experiment takes place? Because it's something that happened on the stage right now. I have a lot of observations, but I bet you couldn't get about maybe 20% of the time I would agree with each other.
Sorry, okay.
I'm sorry, you know, if something were to happen on stage right now, this whole audience is observing it, probably would get 20% that would, you know, agree. And so I'm just curious as to if you were able to increase the number of observations, especially in the EM sense, electronic warfare sense, because very rarely do we take into account the geospatial aspect of it, because the observation here is going to be different from the observation there. And I think that's one of the challenges we have, is making sure, and net-centric, what Bulldog often talks about, in net-centric warfare, the more that you can tie in nodes and increase your observation, I think you'll have better fidelity as to what's going on. And do you think that's a truism? It's something I preach a lot to my leadership.
Jason, I think you've got your finger on something that's a gaping hole in the presentation that I didn't see till this moment. Exactly. The observation, the role of the observer in the scientific method. Yes, you've asked a bunch of people, you're liable to get different observations. The challenge, I mean, I think using the scientific method is a skill, like anything else. Dancing or singing or writing technical reports. So you have to practice it. You have to get better at it. So one of the challenges is to make sure that the observations are objective. And so the observation is not colored by the individual. If they are colored by the individual, it's like a cauliflower. It grows out in another area. If you do have colored observations and you crowdsource, use a lot of people, and then you look at the sort of the general consensus, I think you can get some real truths that way. But as you say, you need a lot of observations. And then you have to use it a certain way. So now we're talking about methodology again. How you do things. There's so much, trillions of dollars have been spent on the software, creating more and more better models and better models. You know, we did an experiment, it didn't agree. The answer is, well, we didn't represent that resistor on the circuit board correctly. So we get some smart people beavering away on that, completely losing sight of the fact that's not the problem. The problem is how you're using the software. You need to run it many, many times with every possible value of resistance that you have or whatever. Or every attack scenario, every IED attack scenario, to get a statistical view in the software. You must also do the same thing with the experiment. Run it over and over and over again. Some of them repeat exactly each time. Well, we don't need to do 10,000 measurements of that. some of them have noise on them. You need to watch out for those. And you need, as you say, a lot of observations. Then, we fold in the statistical part. Statistics loves information. The more you have, the better the confidence you have in the answer. But, interesting point. The role, the observer is a player in the process. And you need the skills to extract yourself from that. Just talk about what you know. What do I know? Sometimes it's not very much. And what can you claim about an observation? What can you objectively claim? So somebody on the other side of the planet does the same experiment. I'd like to talk about this. You know, I heard something a little while ago, the definition of a fact. Hardly anybody knows what a fact is. A fact is the result of an experiment which has been done so many times with the same result that we just agree we're not going to do the experiment anymore. Fact. The sun's coming up tomorrow. It might not. We've looked so many times, and it came up every time. We don't bother looking anymore. That's a fact. Fact, I was abducted by aliens. That's not a fact. We can't repeat the experiment. So it has to do with, and it's agreement. So this is echelon. You start with a hypothesis. We get enough evidence. It starts to become a theory. It's a soft thing. It's not a hypothesis. It's a theory anymore. And then it becomes, you know, there are other things I can rambling about. You get consensus and constructs and so forth. So, anyway, I'll stop talking.
Okay, gentlemen, well, thank you very much. And David and Sean, as you go forward, I'd like you to, one thing I'd like to pass on to you is that you talked about kind of three variables: threats, physics, phenomenology. As you pull the string from the R&D side into the operational side, you get into something called operational art. And my reflections on what you talked about via observation is that folks like Izzy out there and others that are actually employing electronic attack have little observation when it's actually occurred.
Fascinating.
So think about that as you try to translate those R&D programs into the operational art aspect, because it does make a fact.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'd like to invite anybody who'd like to participate in further discussion to the EW candidate booth. Thanks a lot.